Geoff, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I'm really thrilled to be speaking with you today.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, Brendan.
We've been chatting off air and before the podcast rolled today. You're very familiar with our own vision to inspire, connect, and enable ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. So I always open up this question to our guest, Geoff. What does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Scaling with purpose. Let's see here. So what comes up for me when I hear that term is aspiring to build a business that matters, that has sort of a net positive effect on the world. So I think very immature people start businesses to just sort of make money. Sure, we all need to make money to live in this world, but great businesses, I believe, are founded under some premise that help someone solve a real need or a problem. So scaling with purpose would be, building a business that has a big impact on others, that's positive. Scaling a business without purpose would be just kind of like blindly trying to make the, revenue and profits go up without much regard for who benefits.
Yeah, I love that. And purpose features quite heavily, obviously, in all of our podcasts. And I was reviewing yours during my research. I love your book, Who, and we're going to get into that as we get into the podcast. But our respective purpose and vision are very much aligned. You state that you help leaders amplify their positive impact on the world. So our listeners will be very curious. How do you do that, Geoff?
Sure. So I'll answer the how we do it part, and then I think your listeners might be interested in an embarrassing moment that happened that stimulated the thinking behind that credo that you just recited. So how do we help leaders amplify their positive impact on the world? We're really just focused on helping influential leaders do one thing very well in order to be able to win. And it's widely considered the number one topic in business, which is hiring and developing talented teams. So that's it. It's like helping leaders win by helping them solve their number one problem is how we make good on that credo, that mission statement that you mentioned.
Yeah, and as I mentioned at the outset, your wonderful book, Who, which we'll get into. I mean, what inspired you to start ghSMART?
Let's see here. So after early career goals were maybe be a TV broadcaster. I thought that sounded fun. Being an advertising person and coming up with creative branding campaigns, I thought that seemed like an interesting career path. But I grew up in and sort of came of age as an economics major in the 1990s. So sort of finance and consulting were the big industries to go into, and I was really intrigued by a white space in the world of consulting, which is, how to make better people decisions. So, there are all these great firms that help you solve if you're a leader, your strategy problems. You have, top law firms, you have top accounting firms, top investment banks, but there really wasn't a firm that helps you solve your people problems at the top, the senior most people problems. Who to hire, how to get a talented team to work well together in order to achieve the organization's goals. So that kind of came to mind. I had done an internship at a venture capital firm, and to listening to these wise men and women who mentored me, they were constantly saying, what's most important in investing in entrepreneurs is not the idea, but the person you invest in. And I was thinking, okay, that makes sense. And yet the habits in the world of venture capital or high finance are all set up around doing financial due diligence or doing market scanning or, kicking the tires on the product. So that was sort of the initial seed of an idea for ghSMART was, I wonder if the world could use a firm that used data and, reliable methods to help scarce capital, money, find its way into the hands of worthy entrepreneurs who would then turn that capital into jobs and products and ultimately profits that pay tax revenue, that build roads and schools. So it was kind of like, all right, this type of firm should exist. And then I also wanted to create a culture at a firm where people could do meaningful, impactful work, but also have a life. So there's, whether you want to be a doctor or really any of these sort of high flying careers or professions, there's this assumption that you need to really suffer, like miserable style for a good portion of years in order to kind of pay your dues and to, join that profession. And I don't know, it seemed like a false trade-off to me. Why couldn't you have a firm where people could do very impactful work, make money, but also have more freedom and be able to have a life? So that was it. Those are the sort of two thoughts that formed the early business plan for the consulting firm that I founded.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic success. I mean, we spoke previously. You're not only a very acclaimed author, but a hugely accomplished entrepreneur, given the success of ghSMART. So ghSMART, you have scaled significantly, 10x in the last 10 years, from $10 million revenue to $100 million revenue.
That's right.
And I'm curious.
So we practice what we preach, right? I'm not only an author or just sort of talking about this stuff. I spend most of my waking hours actually practicing all the things that we're talking about today and growing our business. It's been a wonderful run, and we feel like we're just getting going here, 27 years into our founding.
That's fantastic, and the point is, and I think it's so important to be a student of your own material, and we'll get into that a little bit more. In terms of the two aspects of why you founded the business, you identified white space. The McKinseys were there, the Coopers and Lybrand, the PwCs, the Ernst & Youngs. Those guys were all there, but nobody was focusing on talent. So clearly you identified an opportunity. The other aspect of that was you desired to create a culture where you as the leader and those who join your company could have a life. Now,
that's right. Imagine that. Yeah, being able to do great work. And not have to have a big sacrifice element in your career success.
So given your 27 years, how has that been? And importantly, what are the let's say the three components, if you to draw out three components of your scaling success, what would they be? But let's start with that.
That's a tough question. I'll give you a straight answer of what comes to mind. So the key to scaling over 10x over the last 10 years for our business, what immediately comes to mind is we really did focus on hiring great talent. So I think if you use the rigorous methods that we're going to talk about a little later in this podcast, and you put the energy into really selecting a team of the most talented, diverse, good-hearted people you can imagine, it takes extra energy. It takes an extra commitment to really set the bar high and go after these folks and bring them in. I'd say that is very self-reinforcing with all the other things that you want, having good products for clients, having, great service, having, smart decisions being made 1,000 times a week around, the management of the finances, et cetera. So I'd say, very high bar for talent, and then, doing the things that we say you should do to have a high hiring success rate. That'd be one. The second one is around the culture. And this one's trickier because we really were pretty and have been very true to the original vision of having a culture based on freedom. So this is like, and it was a little bit dumb luck. So let me double click on this one for a second. So a culture of freedom would be the second thing. I don't know what the third thing is yet, Brendan, but let me stall you first on number two, and then I'll think of a third one that was really key. I'd say transparency is number three around our client impact, and we'll more of that in a second. But a number two on culture. So in 1995, when I founded the firm, just out of dumb luck, that's right when the cell phone became sort of an acceptable business practice. You could talk on a phone. Suddenly you could sort of do your work anywhere, right? And also email. You can, I remember when I worked as an intern in undergrad during my PhD training, we would print and then, FedEx documents around, and that took like a half a day. It's like horrible, right? And you had to have like staff and, lots of arms and legs and people helping with all this, document management. Now, all of a sudden in 1995, you could send an email. So those two little technological advances really made it possible, I think, to have a culture based on freedom where we weren't looking over everyone's shoulder to watch them do their work. Point one, good hiring. Point two, culture of freedom, kind of like the familiar saying, hire the best and sort of, get out of their way. But really, I mean, putting that into practice isn't always easy, but we did it on the freedom part. And then three, the transparency one. This is really important. We've all heard, transparency is good, but I'll tell you where I think it really helped us. And it's in two ways. I mentioned the first, which is around client impact. So since the very early days, we measure our client satisfaction. So of your listeners, whenever I do big events and I ask a room full of CEOs or entrepreneurs, how many of you reliably measure your customer impact or client impact? It's like 25% have a rigorous method. In our case, we do a 6-month survey. It goes out, we measure it, we have charts, the whole deal, right? And and so that was very helpful to know and to ask. We just asked two questions. One is, how satisfied have you been with the value of our services over the last 6 months? And they can measure it on a 5-point scale. And then we just say comments, tell us anything, give us some advice, complain about something, tell us something we're not doing for you. And really, that was super helpful all throughout to know that our clients are getting value and know what they value, know what they don't value. So transparency around measuring client satisfaction, I think, is a discipline that not all entrepreneurs follow, that I found super helpful. The other transparency is transparency around what people's jobs are and what their performance metrics are. So I remember long ago, I can't remember who, some successful business person told me that I, as the founder, shouldn't be the bad guy giving direct feedback all the time to all of our colleagues about how they're performing, but rather get the CFO to do it, or have the CFO collect objective data on their client satisfaction scores, on their revenue, on just other things, their peer and teamwork scores, their collegiality scores with their colleagues. So what's really nice is everyone at ghSMART from the early days has a very clear, transparent set of expectations. Like, hey, make clients happy, take care of your colleagues, but it's operationalized into actual metrics, like get a 90% or better on client satisfaction, like that kind of thing. And so by doing that, it really helps reinforce the freedom culture, because then people realize what's valuable and they realize what they need, what they need to do in order to deliver value. And they know that their work is being measured. So there's less politics, there's less confusion and ambiguity. We have a entirely remote geography. We have people scattered around North America and the UK and Germany right now in 14 locations. But most often they're working kind of wherever they want. They can, they can work from home. They can work at client site. They can work on the beach. I mean, it really doesn't matter to me where they work. So, but really key there on this transparency point is, without having very clear performance expectations and a mechanism for measuring it, I think it's very difficult to give people the kind of freedom in a culture that's desirable. So, in summary, I think I did it. Brendan, 3 tips to scaling. 1, follow the who approach to hiring to really have a very a successful hiring rate. Number 1. 2 is, for us, it was building a culture of freedom. And then 3 was having transparency around our client impact and around the performance expectations and results of our colleagues. I think that's 95% of it. Nothing else really stands out as a key to scaling, at least in our experience over the last decade.
It's like I teed you up for this, but I'm going to indulge myself and map these on to the ScaleX principles. So our third ScaleX principle is people. And we talk about ensuring you get the right jockey on the right horse running the right race. Our 10th principle, which holds the entire the entire model together, is positive growth culture, and we'll get into that a little bit further, what you've alluded to. And then our 6th principle is around performance, having clear objective metrics that everyone is bought into, so they're not imposed, but everyone has bought into those, and that allows you then, where someone is not performing, allows you to have a conversation on metrics which are objective and have been agreed, mutually aligned to the vision. So I
That's
love
right.
those.
Well, I'd say you've all identified at least the key ones that we found in our experience.
Brilliant. And it's always good to have these reaffirmed with those who have been there and done it in relation to their scaling success. Just want to pick up on one point. The scoring that you use to evaluate client engagement, is that a net promoter score, or is it your version of the net promoter score?
You know, it's funny. We added in the net promoter score more recently, maybe like 7-8 years ago or so. So, you know, the questions are literally just rate the value of our services, and then the net promoter score questions around, you know, like 1 to 10, where, you know, if someone's willing to, the degree to which they're willing to recommend to a friend, and if they're what is that, a 9 or 10, they're a plus. If they're like, you know,
9 or 10, they're a promoter. Less than 6, they're a detractor.
Less than 6, they're a detractor. Yes. So we do keep track of that. We have a number of Bain Consulting alums in our firm, and Bain's Fred Reicheld had developed that method, and I think it's great. And then there are, you know, comps where you can like look and see how your net promoter score measures up relative to other companies.
Brilliant. We've teased the listeners with your book, and the book is Who. There are some incredible statistics in this, just to open out, and the one that really stood out for me is noted in the inside cover that the cost of a wrong hire on a position at a senior level, let's say $100,000, could be as much as $1.5 million. So this is a significant problem. Now, I found when we were scaling our own business that as much as we attempted to be very analytical about hiring, at best, it was 50-50 at a senior level.
50-50 is the average globally hiring, you know, success failure rate, using kind of homegrown methods, or just, you know, the ways that people ordinarily hire. So you weren't any worse or any better than average. That's about average. Okay.
Now you promote using the A-frame method, which I really love, and we now promote within our own program, a 90% probability of being successful with your hires following.
That's right. If 50% is the baseline success rate in hiring, if anybody, our clients, we measure it internally, but if you follow the 4 steps to good hiring in the Who book, you will achieve a 90% hiring success rate. That's, you know, that I think it's you know, it's kind of too much to try to do anything 100%, right? But you can hit 90, and that's a lot better than 50. I mean, imagine the power you'd have as a business leader if 9 out of 10 times you're getting it right, versus only 5 out of 10 times getting it right, as measured by, because right now I'm reading some of your listeners' minds are going, wait a second, how does he measure successful hiring or not? It's super simple, listeners. A year after you hire the person, were you happy you hired them, or do you regret the decision? That's it. You know, so keep it simple, but you know, you'll hit 90% hiring success if they follow the 4 steps in good hiring.
So look, you've teed that up beautifully. Let's get into the 4 steps of good hiring, if you will.
Sure.
Geoff.
All right, so I'll name what they are. And you know, it's so disappointing, Brendan, that what I'm about to reveal doesn't sound strange or weird, or like it's some, you know, cosmic force that you need to summon to this thing. It sounds like common sense, and it is. It's just very uncommon practice. So the first step in good hiring is writing down what you expect the person to actually accomplish. We call that a scorecard. And you got to use the same scorecard to look at all the candidates by using a consistent scorecard that takes out some bias, and it takes out some of the things that lead to bad hiring decisions. The second step, and then I'm happy to drill down on any of these, we call the source step, which is actually the most common question I get asked, which is how do you source a flow of good candidates? Like, where do they come from? How do you find them? And so we have some data-based insights on how that works best. The third step is called the select step. I think this is probably the hardest of the steps. It's where you have to use good interview formats rather than bad interview formats in order to really understand someone for who they are to make a good hiring decision. And the fourth and final step is called the sell step, where just because you've figured out who you want to hire doesn't mean you've hired them yet, right? So there was an old riddle, which is there are 5 frogs on a log, and 2 decide to jump off. How many frogs are left on the log? And a lot of people will say 3, but the answer is still 5, because deciding to do something and doing something are 2 different things. So anyway, just because you decided to hire someone doesn't mean you hire them. That's why we have the fourth and final step, which is called sell. And that's just a set of almost like checklists that you can use as a hiring manager, as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, to make sure you maximize the chance that the person says yes to your job offer. So that's it. They're like 4 steps, there aren't 50 steps. It's not weird. It's very straightforward, but using discipline and actually following the steps religiously is what leads to the 90% hiring success rate.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was chatting to a CEO this morning who has scaled his business over the last 7 years from $300,000 to over $20 million.
Great.
And he's just a really straightforward guy. And the point he was making is that we overcomplicate everything, or we have a tendency to.
Yes.
And so I love the simplicity of the model. And my mom cites the same phrase, common sense isn't that common after all. So I can relate to that. Let's get into each of them. The scorecard, for me, how important is it for leaders to have real clarity in their vision, to understand where they want to go before they consider who they need to help them get there, and then start to devise the metrics?
Yeah, that's a very controversial question. I have an opinion on it, but I respect other people's opinions too. And the question is, what comes first? The what, the vision, the what and the why, right? Or the who. Some say get the people first, and then figure out, shape the vision and the strategy. Others say, well, wait a second, how do you even know what people to get unless you figure out what you're doing with the organization and have a sense for why you're doing it? Let's say, for argument's sake, I think it makes a slight bit more sense to really start with what you're trying to accomplish with the organization and why. And then to slot the right who in, because I have seen organizations across the tens of thousands that we've advised as consultants where they might have like a change of strategy, and they kind of like don't have the right people to execute on that new strategy. Maybe it's a go global, maybe it's a go digital. You know what I'm saying? So I do think being clear on what you're doing as an organization first is smart, and then figuring out, great, well, who do we need to execute on that vision? So vision one, and in this, once you figured that out, I think it's a matter of making tough trade-offs. I think you just mentioned a second ago, people tend to take on too many priorities or have too much complexity, and that's what we found also. I know we're talking about the Who book. In a subsequent book we wrote called Power Score, we found that, let me get the right numbers here because this will support what you just said. We found that 90% of the time when leaders don't have good priority clarity, it's because they just have too many of them. And we also found that only 24% of leaders in our giant database at the time, we looked at 15,000 successful and unsuccessful executive careers, that only 24% of them were good at prioritizing. And being good at prioritizing means narrowing down to a small set of priorities. So in creating a scorecard, the hard work is like, what does this organization exist for? And okay, for this role, then what's the short list of things that we really want this person to accomplish? And so that's what we call the outcomes for the scorecard. You kind of like jot down in very simple terms what the overall mission for this role is and how it fits into the kind of grand vision. that's like a little poetic, but it should be fairly short and clear. If it's a marketing role, for example, is this, role all about getting, brand awareness, or is this role about closing deals, a small number of big deals, or a big number of small deals, or, you have to have a little bit of top spin on, knowing what you want the person to accomplish. Then you distill it down into very clear outcomes that are measurable. And those outcomes are, like 5 to 7 outcomes that if the person achieved them, you'd be happy as a entrepreneur, as a hiring manager. And those are a lot of our clients or folks who read our books will say, like, oh, this role is really intangible and you can't really put your finger on what a good result would be, to which I always play the tough love role a little bit and say, hey, look, if you can't put a number on what success looks like in that role, maybe you don't need it. And then people often say, oh, no, we need it. And I say, well, great. Well, if a person who is the very best hire you can imagine was in there performing well versus someone who, wasn't at all a fit for that role, how might that show up in some number somewhere? And so that's how you kind of get to really focusing in on what matters and what's difficult about the job, that's quantitatively measurable.
Yeah.
And the last part on the scorecard is just, what competencies do you think are important? And that one's a little more qualitative. So, in an entrepreneurial environment, people are very decisive and move quickly. Like, that's extra important. In a more formal government setting, you kind of don't want that as much as you want people who are, patient with following process and dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. So the competencies are really just kind of like a simple thought of, okay, given our overall vision for the organization, given the mission for this role and those outcomes this person is expected to achieve, what are the competencies, the ways of working that kind of go along with success in that role? And that's it. It's just like a scorecard. It's a list of the criteria essentially that matter for that particular role.
Yeah, I love this, and we're really aligned. We advocate the use of objectives and key results. You're probably familiar with John Doerr's work, and
yeah, I think his book's up here somewhere. I love it. There are a bunch of ways to skin that cat, but his measure what matters.
Absolutely,
I think is a great framework for how to set goals for your team.
And I'm often posed a similar question in terms of the level of ambiguity around what the role should entail, and I pose the one question: well, what does great look like from this role in 12 months' time? Describe to me what great looks like, and then put measurements or metrics on that. So, and if they can't describe what great looks like, then back to what you said, Geoff, then maybe there's a question around the need for the role.
And as the boss or as the CEO, you can offer people multiple choice too. So let's say one of your teammates is trying to hire someone, and you say, like, your question, what does great look like for that role? And if someone's struggling, it's hard to put a number on it. And you say, well, let's say it's client satisfaction. Do we think 20% is good enough? Do we expect 100%? Oh, no, 100% is too much. No, 20% is too low. Well, I don't know. How about 90%? Yeah, 90% sounds about right. So, it's kind of an iterative process where you set the dial of what great looks like. And you and I probably get asked the same question a bit, where, should you, as the boss, set very, very lofty goals that no one's really expected to ever achieve, as a way to really get the best, sort of performance out of people, or you set a low bar that folks are accomplishing to kind of build confidence in your team. I think, or technically, this is how we answer that question in the Who book: is you set the bar high enough that only the top 10% of the talent available in a given labor pool could hit that bar. So if you think about that for a second, you have a labor pool, you're paying any amount of money, whatever the amount of money is. You have a bunch of people who are willing to do that job for that amount of money. It's a guess, but it's an informed guess based on research and talking to people. But setting the bar for expectation high enough that only about the top 10% of talent available in that strata could hit it, that's a pretty good place to set the bar.
No, I love that. And it also feeds nicely into the the objectivity around performance in terms of the understanding and setting the expectations when you hire within a new role. There's absolutely no ambiguity then in terms of what the expectation is of that person coming into this role. So,
yes.
If they're knocking it out of the park in 6 months' time, you've got the benchmark for it. If you have to have a conversation, you've also got the benchmark for it, and nobody has to be surprised when that conversation happens. So,
yeah,
no, I love that. I love the scorecard concept. As something
clarity is your friend.
Yes, there you go. And I believe, back to your word transparency, I'm a great believer in transparency, creating trust. And everyone knows where they stand. So getting into the sourcing then, the building your bench, as we talk about.
Right. Yeah. Build your bench. This is great. This is an important one. So when Randy Street, the co-author of the Who book, he and I are colleagues at ghSMART. When we were doing the research for that book, we didn't have a good answer to the question, what do really successful business leaders do in order to source their best talent? We didn't really know. So we set a goal of talking to 100 of them. So we talked to, this was really fun. We interviewed over 20 self-made billionaire entrepreneurs who just started something from scratch. And talk about scaling. I mean, these are the titans of scaling, right? They build $1 billion plus enterprises from nothing. We asked 20 of them, hey, how did you source your best talent as you built your firm? We also talked to just a whole bunch of other big, company CEOs, entrepreneurs, people in all different industries you can imagine. And what we found was one tactic that a overwhelming majority of very successful leaders used to source people, and that is, drum roll please, paying your existing employees a referral bonus for sourcing in talent. So, it kind of makes perfect sense, but you have to pay for it. And so, if I give talks to audiences, I ask them, how does anybody here offer a referral bounty for how, you pay your employee for referring people in? And people raise their hands. Only about 10% of an audience will have one of these things. And I'll say, well, how much do you pay? And it's kind of $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 US equivalent is average. And then, occasionally someone will sort of raise their hand and say 5,000, and then I'll make a joke about, it's like okay, I hear 1,000, I hear 3,000, I hear 5,000, I hear 10,000. Anybody give me 10,000? And it's almost never over 10,000. But the point is this: if you pay your people to keep their eyes open for great talent, or frankly, just to think about, great organizations where they've worked previously, like who is great? Let's go hire them. Great. I mean, it's a very time efficient way to source plenty of candidates who are great. I'll tell you the limitation of it is people do tend to know people who are kind of like them in background. So you're not going to automatically achieve your diversity goals as far as having a great span of different people from different backgrounds just on its own. You have to say hey, we're looking for people from all backgrounds for this chief marketing officer role. Everybody go hit your networks and put the word out and come bring some candidates to us. But this whole idea of paying your people to source talent, I think it's great. We started doing that, back 12 years ago when the first version, the book first came out. And it's been the way, actually, I think we hire, probably about 70% plus of the people, even at my own firm, is through this employee referral bounty program. I did find though, if you don't talk about it internally and kind of promote it and hype it up a little bit, people forget and then they stop sourcing. But if you say, every now and then, here's a big check and you're giving it to so-and-so for having sourced so-and-so on their first start date, and you make a little bit of ceremony around it, you can just count on having I don't want to say endless flow of great talent, but a really consistent flow of great talent from your own employees' networks. And actually LinkedIn and networks like that are helpful for employees being empowered to, kind of talk about job openings and going and sourcing people out of their own networks. I don't really recommend, advertising for jobs and just kind of going super big, 10,000 hits kind of thing. Does anybody know a CFO? Like that, in our experience, doesn't lead to, just the right candidates, but certainly empowering your employees who know your company, know your culture, and know the job, to go on your behalf, source talent, is a really smart thing to do.
Yeah, I completely subscribe to that. In fact, a lot of my friends will attest to the fact that if I was out on a bike ride or out on a run, I would torture them in relation to the available roles that were existing in our company. I would talk
Yes.
about it constantly, always putting the word out. And I found the most successful hires were those that come referred from within your own network. So completely
Yep.
subscribe to that. And we also had a referral scheme, but what we found, similar to your experience, Geoff, promoting that internally constantly,
Yes.
promoting the fact that you have this referrals scheme in operation is so critically important. So yeah, that's really interesting.
And you know
LinkedIn.
what, Brendan, drop it in other scorecards also. So, if you have a number of things on the list of, what you expect your colleagues to do, put in there, hey, look, we'd love your help in continuing to hire great folks across all the different functional areas here, and put the expectation that they're, everyone's job is to keep their eyes open for great talent.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. It just wasn't the preserve of the talent acquisition department or talent acquisition function. It's everyone's responsibility. I always say, look, the greatest gift a leader can give their team is the hire of a wonderful person. So
right.
So critically important. You referenced LinkedIn. I actually was at dinner recently with Sam Rathling, who I interviewed on episode 1, who's this self-professed queen of LinkedIn, a wonderful lady who actually has built her business around LinkedIn. She was saying that there's almost 800 million people now on LinkedIn.
Wow, 800 million. That's a big number.
Now, what I've found is that leaders tend to, well, certainly a large portion of them tend to shy away from LinkedIn for various reasons, whether that be that they don't want to, they have a paranoia around what their competitors will see, or some fear about building their own personal brand. I mean, have you a view on that, Geoff?
Yeah. So many years ago, I remember a strategic question for our business strategy was, do we want to share our insights with the world? Do we want to talk to the media? Do we, want to do, and then later social media, et cetera? And once we wrote our credo as a firm, what we stand for, one of the sentences in it, I recall, is we share our knowledge about leadership with the world. Like, we just decided, you know what, we're gonna share it. So I think it's I don't know, I don't want to overly editorialize this, but I think it's a losing mindset to think that, the right approach here is to keep quiet and hoard your intellectual property secrets. I think, what seems to be more of a pattern of success is to, generate them and then share them kind of loudly. So I'd say I'd criticize myself for being slower into business social media. So LinkedIn, has been around for a while. As a firm, we really didn't prioritize it till only about 3 or 4 years ago, but it's been marvelous for, we call it going loud on LinkedIn. We encourage everybody, hey, if you're having a great day, go loud on LinkedIn. You have a point of view on leadership, post it. Like, we try to make a safe place where, sure, run it by the PR folks. We want it to be professional, not, say anything too cuckoo, but that, I think it's better than it is not to have people in a mindset, hey, let's share some insights with the world. So it's been helpful to us. We don't really do Twitter per se, but LinkedIn specifically, as a place where people think about their careers and think about leadership success. So we found that to be an appropriate platform for, like, getting the word out on sharing intellectual property, but also, if we, win an award or we're trying to hire some more people, kind of letting the world know.
Yeah, I love that. Go loud on LinkedIn. You will be a great fan of Sam Rathling now for that. It's very consistent with her message as well. Encourage your team members to promote the successes, promote the environment, promote the culture on LinkedIn, on those social media platforms. So that's really interesting. We come to the third aspect then of the F framework: select.
Oh yes, the select step. So, okay. Let's talk about what not to do first when you're interviewing people for jobs. And then we'll talk about, in contrast, what the better approach is. So one of these books behind me. So I did a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology, which specializes in basically human behavior at work. And the area that I specifically focused on studying was around selecting people, interviews, etc. So this beast of a book, the Handbook of Industrial and Organizational Psychology, in it goes through all sorts of different interview methods and ways of trying to pick people for your teams. And I'll spare your listeners the 4 years of pain and suffering that I went through, reading literally thousands of studies on the topic. And here are a couple of things I'll net out of what not to do. So when you're interviewing for people for jobs, don't ask them hypothetical questions. Just don't. What's the hypothetical question? All right, here, Brendan, play along with me for a second. Let's say you're interviewing for a job at ghSMART. And, I say something like, Brendan, teamwork, is really important as a value at ghSMART. Here's a hypothetical question. How would you handle a conflict with a colleague?
Well,
you got to answer it.
I'm going to give you a hypothetical answer then.
Well, go for it. How would you handle a conflict with a colleague?
Well, what I would seek to do is understand the nature of the conflict and seek to have a conversation to get to the root cause of that conflict. And
yes,
if we can put some action in place to actually move forward beyond it.
A beautiful answer. Right. You'd sit down, listen to the colleague, try to get to the root of the conflict, and collaboratively put together a plan to solve it. I think it's a beautiful answer. It just is unhinged from reality. So Brendan could be the worst teammate in the world, but if you ask him a hypothetical question that has kind of an obvious answer, it's actually just more destructive than it is helpful. It's not in any way predictive of how people perform on the job, how they answer hypothetical questions. So even today, it kind of drives me nuts because this insight's been around for over half a century. It's not my insight. It's just, slews of studies on selection interviewing suggest if you ask hypothetical questions, you're going to get hypothetical answers and you're going to make hiring mistakes. So that's one thing to avoid. Another thing to avoid is hiring with your gut. I think there's even a book with that title. Well, I don't know. I didn't see. It's very dangerous to hire with your gut because your gut is biased. Your gut relies on first impressions. Your gut doesn't process, lots and lots of data that you need to collect in order to make a smart decision about who you want to hire. So I think it's bad advice to tell people, oh, you know what you really need to do? Don't bother following all these methods and, collecting objective data. You just need to really listen to your gut. So that's a recipe for failure. There are a bunch of other really bad pitfalls in hiring. One, here's an entrepreneurial one for you. I was doing an entrepreneur conference at MIT. I remember global entrepreneurs is this like fancy, invite only thing. And one of the men in the room said, "Hey, I have a real problem hiring people. It just doesn't seem to work. I can't get them to come back to the next interview after I put them through, our kind of unique interview format." And I was like, Brendan, midway through talking about the best practices of hiring, and I paused for a second and said, "All right, well, do you want to share what your interview method is with us?" And this guy said, "Well, sure." He goes, our culture is very competitive and aggressive, and I like to do a very aggressive interview, where we will, for example, ask a candidate, sell me this pen, which I think is from a movie. Anyway, so they do this kind of aggressive pressure cooker sort of atmosphere around asking questions and then see how the candidate can handle it. And I said, well, okay, that's interesting. So, how's it working for you? And he said, well, it's not really working well because even our best candidates end up, choosing to not come back for the next interview after going through that experience. And so, I felt a little bit bad because it was just like so blindingly obvious that, scaring people or making them feel uncomfortable in an interview, isn't a very good way to woo someone to your company or collect data to figure out if they're a good fit or not. So lots of bad ways to interview, from the hypothetical interview to the, scare and stress out your candidate interview to the just pure, gut feel approach, which is like devoid of data. Okay.
So just before we step on to the next part then, in summation of that, taking your interview technique from Jerry Maguire or asking how you would evacuate New York in 30 minutes, both a no-no.
Well, that's interesting. That's kind of sort of in that camp of hypothetical question. It's like a brain teaser. Some good companies actually asked brain teaser kind of questions for many years as a way, you know, we're really looking for smart people. How many bowling balls can you estimate fit in a Boeing 747? Why are manhole covers round? You know, how many tennis balls are produced in the world annually? You know, like, okay, you know, thanks for the brain teaser, but like, is this really getting at a lot of the substance of what makes someone a good candidate or not? You know, those companies, I don't want to name names, but have subsequently let go of some of that brain teaser heavy sort of interviewing because it just isn't a very good predictor of the full picture of someone's capabilities. So yeah, that's bad. Yeah, lots of bad ways to do it. You know what? And it's nobody's fault. I mean, we didn't take a class on how to hire people in school. Like very few of even the you know top business schools globally today have even one class period on hiring. We teach a number of them just as you know public service, and it's fun. But it's striking to me how you know bad hiring methods really are out there, and you know it's really not people's fault. So in contrast to these homegrown kind of ineffective hiring methods around interviewing, there are like 4 types of interviews that we talk about in the Who book, and we don't have enough time to really do justice to all of them. I'll just sort of very briefly summarize. One's called the screening interview. So this is if you just want to have a first conversation with someone, what do you talk about? Well, like, what should you talk about? Well, we've tried it a bunch of ways and used methods that, you know, blend with the literature on what works. And we found asking people what their career goals are. That's a good question for a screening interview. Asking them what their strengths are and to give examples of what they actually did that prove that point. You know, that's a good question. I'm asking people what they're not good at professionally and to give some examples. Here's a tricky question that we find very useful for a screening interview, which is to tell someone, you know, if you go to a subsequent interview round, we might ask for your help in talking to some references, you know, that kind of thing. But for now, if you just tell us the first name of your last 5 bosses, and if we do get a chance, if you advance in the interview process and we get a chance to talk with some of them, you know, how high are they going to rate your performance back in that job and why? And I'll tell you, Brendan, there's great inflation here. So if you ask for like a 10-point scale, 9 and 10 means they did a really good job, right? If people are like, I think that boss will give me a 7, you know, pretty much anything 7 or less is like really bad. And then you ask them, well, why? Why do you think that boss wouldn't rate your performance very highly? It's interesting if you put that thought in their mind that you are going to do reference checks, so they might as well come clean now and tell us what we're going to hear. You do get a nice richness of truth from candidates pretty early in the process, telling you how they're likely to be rated and why from these bosses. So that's a screening interview, 30 minutes. You can do it on the phone. You can do it on video. Don't invite people to come into your office if you have one for a screening interview, just because you want to, you know, keep it a light time commitment, not like a big thing where then all of a sudden they need a tour and you're, you know, taking up a bunch of your people's time. So it's almost like a funnel. So screening interview, yeah, let's say you're hiring a key person, like a C-suite, like a CFO or something. You know, maybe you have 10 people you do a screening interview with, and you invite only 3 of them to like actually come in to the next round of interview, which we call the Who interview, where you as the boss sit with the person and talk through their whole career life with a fine-tooth comb. It's not as intimidating as it sounds. It's more conversational, but basically the format in simple terms is you say, hey, congratulations, you know, here we are, you've advanced to this next round in the interview. And, you know, boy, I'd really just love to hear more about your career. So let's start in the beginning, talk about some of your early years experiences, you know, early influences in your life, how you did in school, strengths, highlights, low points. And then for each job, you ask them 5 questions that are really good at getting to the heart of how well they performed in their jobs. And the questions are, what were you hired to do in that job? What did you accomplish that you were proud of? What were some low points or mistakes you made in that job? And then you ask them about who'd you work with, you know, bosses, peers, subordinates. and like get some names. This is kind of like I think I learned this one. So my father was an early mentor of mine. I sort of followed in his footsteps to go into the field of industrial psychology, which is a very niche place. And he coined the term, I'll give credit where credit's due, TORC, threat of reference tech. So he believed years ago, and we've, all practiced it since, that if you tell someone you're going to do reference check calls, and you are, so it's not like an empty threat, like you're just telling them, hey, we're going to talk to your bosses, but then get them to like spell the names of their boss. Like, so, Margaret Johnson, can you spell that for me? And then take a pen out, write down the name of the boss. Oh, Margaret Johnson. And then say, hey, what was it like working with Margaret back then? What do you think she'll say when we talk with her? Were some of your big strengths and some of your areas for improvement back then? So that's really helpful. And for recent jobs, do the same little routine with peers. Hey, name a peer you worked with. Write down the name. What do you think he or she will say were your big strengths and weaknesses? And subordinates too. So it's almost like a 360 feedback kind of thing. But honestly, it really works. People, if they know that you are going to talk to references, which you will, they want to get out ahead of it. Like, okay, well, that peer, I didn't really get along with, and here's why. And okay, but all this is good data, and you can really get a picture for someone's, clear strengths and their clear areas for improvement by repeating those questions for each job. The last question, the fifth and final one for each job, is, why did you leave that job? And that's pretty interesting. If you know why people leave their jobs, the better candidates tend to leave a job because they did well and they got promoted, or a client hired them, or an old boss called them up. People who didn't do so well and leave jobs, we say leave for push reasons. So pull versus push. Pull means you get pulled up to something better, and people who consistently get pulled up to something better have a much higher probability of succeeding in the new job you're hiring them for than people who constantly get pushed out of their jobs because there's not a match, because they didn't get along with their boss, because they hated the culture. So watch for blaming, watch for, it was mutual. That's one of my favorite things. Oh, why'd you leave that job? Oh, it was mutual. Oh, as if that like gets them off the hook for poor performance. Like, oh, so you and your boss both agreed you were not a fit for that job. It sounds like, and then sometimes if I really want to collect some fun data, I'll say, well, now who started that conversation? Oh, your boss came to you and said, like, it's not really working out. Oh, okay. So it's pretty easy to figure out how people leave jobs, both by asking them and then by verifying with references. So that's it. You just basically ask people those 5 simple questions for every job they had. You maybe end on like what their overall career goals are. Like, okay, here we are in present day. What are your hopes and dreams for the future? And then you wrap it, and you then go back and look at all these. We collect 500 data points on someone, what they did well, what they didn't do well, what their bosses said about them, their financial performance across their jobs, et cetera. I mean, you really get a lot of data, and then you can like pull out the scorecard and sort of score the person on those different scorecard criteria based on all the data you got. So that's the heart of the select step. There are other pieces that are less important. You could do a focused interview where you have one of your other colleagues or a couple of them interview the candidate on some narrow aspect of the job, like, I don't know, people management or, sales or, project management or something. But basically you just come together then with all that data. And then of the, 10 people who kind of do the screening interview, you ask 3 back maybe to do these longer who interviews and the focus interviews. I like to just do reference checks on the final finalist. Don't do reference checks on 10 candidates, for gosh sake. Do reference checks on your final 1 candidate because it's time consuming. But if you then do really like 5 to 7 reference checks on the final candidate, you can then verify and sort of set a magnitude on some of the themes that you picked up in your interviews. Yeah. And that's it. That's the entire select step, start to finish. Basically, the goal is collect real data on what they've actually accomplished according to them and according to those around them, and then rate it on the scorecard.
I love that. And I've always found the reference checks, and it's incredible how many companies don't go to that additional step, that final step of getting references. I've always found so critically important.
It really puts color and a nice sort of shape to the strengths and weaknesses you hear about a candidate, to have someone just tell you what it was like working with them. I think it's a little scary for people to call past bosses and, oh, am I going to get through to them or not? Another hint is to get your candidate to, call up the people on the reference list that, you just talked about during the interview. Say, hey, I'd like to talk to that boss. I'd like to talk to that peer. Can you please, call and see if they're willing to take my call? And that makes it easier to then actually get the person on the phone or on a video.
And you reminded me about something that we did also in relation to asking for the names of some of their peers who they would hold in high esteem and what they would say about them. It also gave us names of great peers who held them in high esteem, who you can ultimately
right. I mean, that's pretty funny. Yes, I have heard of companies doing that. Yeah, where the actual reference process allows you to get your company's brand out there and to source candidates and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So the final step, sell, before I kind of want to get into a few other questions beyond the framework if we've time, conscious of time.
Of course.
But, the sell step is as it says.
Yeah, I'll keep it simple. The sell step, we looked at why do people accept a job offer? Like what things make them say yes? And this is back to that group of 100, super successful leaders we interview. We asked them, how do you convince people to work at your company? And the 5 things that they said, we just grouped into these 5 S's, the 5 F as in Frank, 5 F's of selling are fit, family, freedom, fortune, and fun. So each one in turn. Fit is probably the best one. It basically just says, literally pull the scorecard out and all your notes and tell the person, hey, Brendan, I think you're going to love it here. Here's how your talents and your interests and the things you're great at fit what we're trying to get done. And, even we at ghSMART, we even share people's how we rated them on the different scorecard things. We go, hey, look, we think you're a great fit. So fit is the best one. Family. Okay, what this doesn't mean is to ask people illegal and insensitive questions like if they're pregnant or planning to have children, or men or women, or anybody really don't ask about family planning. That's not cool, not legal. Don't ask about that. The family checklist thing here just simply means, is there someone in this person's inner circle who has a vote on whether they're going to come to your company or not? So we say, do you have is there a partner, a spouse, or close friend, or anybody, family member who thinks that this is a good idea or a bad idea for you to come work here? And I just a super brief story on that one. One of there's a guy named Sean in my company who's awesome. He very successful, and he kind of implied his wife wasn't super comfortable with him leaving a more established company to come work at our company. So I hopped on a flight to New York and took him and his wife out to dinner, and we very openly just talked about her concerns, and it worked. So they, said yes, and then joined. He subsequently joined, and he's been great. So you got to watch out for the family member who's going to say, nah, let's just not have you join that entrepreneurial company, et cetera. I remember a failure on this one. There's a guy named Dave from Texas in America who told us yes to accepting his offer. He then got married, went on his honeymoon, came back, and he and his wife just decided, he was to stay at this, sort of bigger, more established company rather than come to ghSMART. And that was, very disappointing. And I didn't get out in front of that one. So that's a lesson learned. Obviously, if someone tells you that they have a significant other who's going to have a vote, find out where their head is. So that's a family one. Freedom is really just something I think a lot of people today want, whether it's, Gen Y, Gen Z, Gen X, pretty much anybody, baby boomers, they want more freedom in their work than ever before. And so showing how you won't micromanage them and how you'll give them the freedom to do their work kind of how they want is part of the job, is a selling point. Fortune really just says be clear about how much money someone can expect to make. I made a mistake early in my career. I remember my first CFO I was trying to hire. I told him, he asked how much money he could expect to make over the coming years. And I said, oh, tons. Oh, you're going to make a fortune. And he was like, oh, that's really quaint. No, but really, like how much, I have a mortgage. I'm trying to, save for college for my kids. Like I need to know how much money I can reasonably expect to make working at your company. So he trained me, it's very helpful to just sort of like clarify and commit to people like, hey, look, as we grow the firm, here's how you can expect your cash compensation or your equity, et cetera, to grow. And so that's clarity on that one is even more important than the number. And then fun, just the last of the 5 F's of selling is, what's fun about working at your company, and to try to emphasize that because, life is short. And might as well, people, if they like it and they, it looks like fun, they're more likely to join your company than not. So those are the 5 things that seem to matter most in influencing somebody to accept a job offer.
Those are great. And, when you talk about the fortune in terms of how much somebody can reasonably expect to make, again, I see the link back to the scorecard. Something we did very often was say, well, look, here's what we've agreed, what success looks like. There's the metrics in terms of the performance that's expected. And if you achieve that, then you can expect to earn this.
Great. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like we've all heard, performance-based compensation is really important, not just giving people flat salaries, and not having it be vague, but to be clear on, the if-then statement of individual performance and company performance. Kind of if we're hitting green light, you can expect, this kind of increase in whether it's a base or bonus or equity. We've used that formula very successful and sort of entrepreneur to entrepreneur. If you could set people's base salaries at a reasonable, but kind of on the lower end of the spectrum, but then really give them a lot of upside based on their performance, you end up being able to pay people a lot of money that they deserve by definition because they're achieving their goals. It makes you less fearful about offering large compensation than if you come out of the gates with a really big fixed base number. So I'm a big fan of reasonable base, but very large bonus, both cash and or equity components.
And just on that note, because I get asked about compensation schemes a lot, and especially around the compensation for salespeople. So a couple of questions. One, do you believe everyone in the company should benefit from the company's success so that there's a pool of money set aside in relation to the transparent performance metrics, the net profit, and that everyone should share on that? What's your view on that, Geoff, before I come to the sales question?
I mean, I have a controversial view on that. That's different from most entrepreneurs. I'll share it with you. I do think everyone in the company should have upside if you want to build the winning culture that you want to build. So at my firm, I made a mistake in probably 15 years ago or so. I tried to stimulate stock ownership through a mirror stock program where people, because I was an entrepreneur who didn't want to part with any of my stock, over my dead body. This is my company. And it didn't work. It did not stimulate the ownership behaviors I wanted. And it was pretty expensive, actually. So that was bad. So bad. Throw that out. Instead, I replaced it with just a straight stock ownership program where people can buy or sell shares in the company, actual common shares, the same class of economic shares I have. So we're all in this together. That said, I held on to the legal sort of like vote decisioning part of ownership sharing, so I can still be a control freak entrepreneur and hold the voting shares and not worry about that part of it. But I did want to share economically with folks in the upside success of the firm, and that made a lot of difference in changing people's perspective. Everybody, if you're the newest of assistants or you're the most senior of partners, people can own ghSMART stock. They get quarterly distribution payouts. They know when the stock, is going up, hopefully, not going down. As we grow the firm, the equity value goes up, the size of the dividend payments goes up. And just, I can't tell you how valuable that's been for us, having a culture of inclusion and like, hey, everybody matters is a very, very important that everybody act like an owner around here. So that's been about 10 years or so. I think we started that program. It's been wonderful. And so that's how we do it. Other companies do it by having obviously like, bonus pools based on that there are bigger if the company does better, or smaller if the company does less small. And you could do it that way too, where folks are, I don't like spot bonuses that much, frankly, because you can't count on it. It's weird. Favoritism sort of creeps in. So I'm not as much a fan of the spot bonus as I am about just engineering a structure where everybody matters and everybody can share in the upside of the success of the organization.
Yeah, that ownership piece I feel is key, and it's interesting to get your insight on that. Can you share, and maybe this isn't public knowledge, can you share how much of the company currently resides with the team?
Sure. For you, Brendan, I'm happy to share.
It's just between you and I, Geoff.
Yeah. So I hung on to all the voting rights. So it's, I don't feel like, oh no, by sharing equity and sharing the economics that that's sort of like is a threat to me as a founder and chairman. But my goal at the beginning of this was to transfer half of the ownership of the company into the hands of others while hanging on to the other half. Other entrepreneurs hold on to a lot more. Others give away a lot more. I think John Mackey, who founded Whole Foods, I think was only down to something like 2% ownership around the time that company went public. So he's very generous and shared 98% of it with others. Others just keep a more concentrated percentage. I'm thinking of some titans of industry who still run their namesake companies have much greater than 50% ownership. But for us, it works out very well because it's meaningful enough amounts that it moves the needle in people's ability to generate wealth for their families as we grow the firm. And it's fun too. I mean, if you own a part of the firm that you work at, you care more. It's like having a car you own. You're going to wash it and you're going to vacuum it. You're going to take care of it versus a rental car, right?
Yeah, it's so true. And it's a challenge, and certainly in this side of the water, especially amongst family-owned businesses, that it's the paradigm is to have 100% ownership. And
yes,
there's given your own experience and the experience of the companies that you've worked with, what you're citing here is that divesting that ownership to the team creates a huge amount of accountability, ownership, likely loyalty, and just they care more.
Honestly, you can't fake it. Either they're owners or they're not owners. They figure that out pretty quickly. And so, it has worked for us. It's not for every company. We're very people intensive as a company. We're a consulting, professional services firm. If there was a company that was more around product or more around some, engineering patents or something, like, it might not be as relevant. But for us, it's been kind of amazing. And I'm actually really proud. Just a couple of weeks ago, this annual ranking of all companies in our industry came out. It's called Vault, V-A-U-L-T. Vault, is this third party that surveys thousands of people and says what companies are the best companies to work for. We took 3 categories at number 1, which were overall employee satisfaction, the level of talent, and client interaction. Number one out of other big firms that you've heard of are lower on the list. And I have to think that part of that, is due to this kind of ownership culture and the freedom culture. At least that's what people say, when they're asked, do you like working there or not? So it's been very helpful. Also, Glassdoor. Do you guys have Glassdoor in Ireland? And so it's very scary for a lot of companies. I've met with prospective clients who have a 2 out of 5 Glassdoor rating, and I look at it before I talk to them, and they're telling me that they've got some culture problems in the company. And I'm thinking, yes, you do. 2 out of 5 is really rough. That's a very poor score. In our industry, the top firms have low to mid 4s. We I just checked it yesterday, have a 4.7 out of 5 Glassdoor rating. It's all anonymous. We're not, it's not one of those like manipulated kind of lists or whatever. It's just basically people who feel like it, talk about what it's like working there. And and again, on that list, just because I read the comments, like you take it personally as an entrepreneur, right? It's like a reflection of you to some extent. But they do mention the freedom culture and, sense of ownership are things that make it a good place to work. So anyway, I know it's a controversial thought, the idea of like actually, sharing ownership with others, but it does seem like a smart thing to do for a people intensive business that all the people feel and act like owners.
Brilliant. I love that. And well done. That's phenomenal. Clearly you're hiring very, very well also. So being a student of your own material, as we mentioned earlier. So wonderful. Look, it would be remiss of me before we wrap up, Geoff, not to ask you about the Great Resignation and to get your opinion on the Great Resignation. And I'm making an assumption here, the kind of a misalignment with the 5 Fs probably feature there. But yeah, what is your opinion on the Great Resignation?
Yeah, I think so. The Great Resignation, I think, is a couple things going on, and this is not based. Most things that we've talked about today is that I've observed is based on thousands of cases and data and studies that we've done that sort of support some of the things I've talked about. You're asking me a question we haven't studied yet because we're kind of in the midst of it right now, right? The Great Resignation as a global economy. I think people were just simply burned out on COVID and just the stress of wherever they were working. They're just like looking for give me a change. I need to work somewhere else, anywhere else. And so just sort of plain old stress, I think, plays in. But secondly, and more structurally, the whole work from home, work remotely, and then different companies having different levels of requiring you to come back into the office. And that's just like not working for folks who had a taste of freedom and being able to do work anywhere, anytime. So I think that one, the punchline, I don't know what the punchline on the first point is. People were stressed, so, obviously like being there for colleagues and helping folks, through what was, arguably a, once in a lifetime stressful period, is the best you can do, I think, for not having folks resign due to, general stress reasons. But you have a lot of control over how the work is designed. And I think companies that are experimenting with more, sort of hybrid structures or just figuring out how to give people more freedom to do the work, how they want to do the work, find that they can attract and retain the best talent and people who, don't want to go back into a more constrained work environment aren't. And, unemployment is pretty low in most economies around the world. So it's a seller of human capital market. The job seeker has a lot of power, and they can, and they'll flock to the companies that, match the sort of work style that they really want. So on that one, I think whether big companies or small, you can get out ahead of that by just asking the question, what does freedom mean for your colleagues? And then, how are we doing? Are we giving them freedom, or are we really limiting their freedom? Here's a book recommendation on this topic. It's called Time Smart. We didn't write it. I love the title. It's great. We're ghSMART. I'm Geoff Smart. Book's called Time Smart. But it says how to reclaim your time and live a happier life. And these Harvard researchers really just studied how important having control over your time is in job satisfaction. And I think the companies who understand that will attract and retain more top talent than the companies who don't let people have some more control over their time. That's been my experience in building our firm and our clients' experience, and apparently some Harvard researchers' experience as well.
Fantastic advice. The last hour and a quarter has absolutely flown, Geoff. Look, we will hopefully get you back on for a part 2, I feel, because we've only addressed just one book, and you've two other marvelous books which you co-authored as well. I always pose to our guests in closing, given the amazing experience you've had to date, and as you mentioned at the outset, at $100 million with offices in 14 locations, and you're still only getting started. So lots of experience under the belt. Can you provide our listeners who are ambitious to scale and scale with purpose 3 timeless takeaways?
3 timeless takeaways?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Sure, Brendan. Here we are late in the interview, and I have to think of 3 timeless takeaways for your listeners. All right. Well, I'm gonna cheat, and I'm gonna give you maybe the 1 sentence takeaway from each of our 3 best-selling books. How about that? So save yourself time, listeners. You don't have to read the whole book, or you can if you really want to internalize some of these things. But timeless takeaway one is many sources, business schools, the conference board, entrepreneur surveys, CEO surveys, say that the number one challenge you have is talent, like period. So timeless takeaway one is go right at that and practice the 4 steps of good hiring in order to really make that a strength rather than a liability. And again, the 4 steps of good hiring are: create a scorecard that says what you expect the person to accomplish, source people through employee referrals are a wonderful tactic. 3 is select the right candidates based on substantive interviews that really gather data on how people have actually performed in their careers, not what they say or what they hypothesize. And then 4 is sell the right candidate on joining your company by following what's 5 F's of selling. So that's actual takeaway one is you can control the methods you use to hire people. And if you follow these 4 steps, you will achieve 90% hiring success versus 50%. That's the big takeaway. The second one is in leading your team. So once you've hired the people, okay, now what, right? So their first book, the one that we just talked the most about, is the Who book. And that one still sells like hotcakes. It's still number 1 on Amazon for hiring globally. So that's like the big takeaway is read Who and follow the 4 steps to get hired. The second takeaway, a slightly more subtle book, but around how to manage your team once you have hired these great people. And that book is called Power Score. And in that, we looked at 15,000 teams, and we're asking the question, what separates high-performing teams from low-performing teams? And we're open to really anything. And we had the University of Chicago's Steve Kaplan and his team of outside researchers grinding through the data. Like, it wasn't us like coming in with already kind of a prefab idea of what we're going to find. It's these academics, really doing proper research. And what they found was a really surprising finding that teams were 20 times more likely to be successful at achieving the goal of the team if the team was good at 3 things. And you had to be good at all 3 things to get the 20 times more likely to be successful thing. Kind of like a triathlon. You have to be good at, swimming, biking, and running. Like, you can't be really bad at one or you're not going to win a triathlon. So the idea here is similar idea. You have to be good at all 3 of these 3 things. And the 3 things are, number 1 is teams have to be good at prioritizing. So teams that take on too much and are bad at prioritizing, that have their energy diffused, they don't do as well. But being good at prioritizing, good at narrowing down to a small number of priorities that matter, that's the mark of a high-performing team. Number 2 is who's on the team. So being really good at hiring and firing, following the Who approach, essentially, to really having a high success rate of hiring the right folks and being willing to say goodbye if someone ends up, it becomes clear that they're not a good match for that team. And then third and finally is successful teams build relationships that are focused on results. So high-performing teams aren't just kind of yucking it up, having fun together. The high-performing teams come around together to look at what's working, what's not working. They're very focused on results. The dashboard, like how can we win? What's working? What's not working is the common sort of conversation on the team. So anyway, my second big takeaway here is if you're leading a team, now that if you want to be 20 times more likely to be successful, make sure that team is good at prioritizing, make sure the team is good at putting the right people in the right seats and being willing to remove folks who aren't. And then 3 is building relationships focused on results. So that's the sort of power score. It spells PWR, P for priorities, W for who is on the team, and R is for relationships. That's kind of a simple way of remembering what makes teams successful. And you can score yourself on it. Anyway, longer story, but we call it having a power conversation where how amazing is this to have a 1-hour strategy chat with your team where you say, hey, everyone, let's rate ourselves on, do we have the right priorities? Do we have the right people, on this team and in this organization? And have we built relationships focused on results? And then like discuss. And it's a really sharp way of focusing on what's working and what's not working and the success of the team. The third thing, oh my gosh, timeless takeaway for our audience. Okay, here's a bit of, this is a treat, which is an answer to a question. Scorecard aside, are there any timeless skills or behaviors that seem to show up in successful people who become CEO and succeed as CEO? And my colleague Elena Botello led our ghSMART CEO Genome project, where we put it even more. I think by then we had maybe 20,000 examples of successful and unsuccessful careers, and we looked at the behaviors that, no matter what the context, if you show these behaviors, you're going to put yourself on the side of success versus failure. And these 4 behaviors that we discovered spell the word dare. It's like an easy way to remember it. And so what we found was, is you can become a successful CEO if you are decisive. So the first thing is D stands for decisive. So a mark of CEO success is being willing to make decisions and make like a lot of them, like make more decisions and change your mind and make another decision is the pattern of success, more than analysis paralysis and waiting for months and years to make a darn decision. So decisiveness is one of the 4 behaviors. The second one is adaptability. And the headline on this one was, conditions change. So don't just keep doing the same things that made you successful when the conditions were what they used to be. So being smart enough to say, hey, look, and brave enough to say, I think the conditions have changed here. Let's adjust our plan forward, is the second of the 4 behaviors that are associated with CEO success. The third one is really boring. The third one is R, stands for reliability. So Brendan, contrary to popular opinion and what makes good business news headlines, CEO greatness isn't about a flash in the pan or some sort of stroke of genius on a Tuesday. It's about reliably putting in place the plans and people and strategies and fizzling away at it every day to achieve results in a reliable fashion. So reliability, as boring as that sounds, was the third of the 4 behaviors associated with successful CEOs. Being reliable, do what you say you're going to do, achieve goals through steady effort and reliable execution.
I love that. We call it stick-to-itiveness.
There you go. That's it. It's required. Stick-to-itiveness. I think that's a great way of putting it as well. The last one, the last behavior, we call it engaging, but it's kind of like engaging for impact. It's the idea that persuasion and figuring out whether it's landing clients or turning the tide on, inspiring your colleagues. But, basically you can't be quiet and be a great leader. Yes, introverts, actually in this exact study, we found introverts slightly outperform extroverts as CEOs. So, let's throw out the myth that the charismatic CEO who's extroverted, is the best model or the only model. In fact, our data suggests that introverts slightly outperform extroverts. But you do have to talk. You do have to engage for impact with outside constituents, whether it's in fundraising or selling big accounts, or internally in inspiring and reminding people what we're here for and what we're trying to accomplish. So engaging for impact, was a clear behavior of the 4 DARE behaviors associated with CEO success.
You have given a lot of value in those timeless takeaways alone, Geoff. So I really appreciate that. I love those.
And that book that Elena and Kim wrote is called The CEO Next Door. So if your listeners are interested in learning more about those 4 behaviors,
we'll put a link to that in the show notes. I love this. So hire well, use the 4 steps. And I remember listening to Richard Branson at an IOD conference quite a number of years ago, and this was just so profound. Quite blunt, but very profound. He said, "I'd rather have a hole in my business than an asshole in my business," and it's just so true. In terms of you get
Richard Branson, I respect him as an entrepreneur. Also, in his most recent autobiography, he says that point, that talent is the number one thing to get right in your business.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and this whole it's better. I've heard it expressed: no breath is better than bad breath when it comes to having a colleague in a role. It's better to not have someone than it is to have someone who's just really not a good fit.
No, absolutely. And sometimes as entrepreneurs, we tend to get impatient in relation to hiring, and you think if the role's filled, that's it done, and you can, pave a trail of disaster if you get that hiring wrong. But it's a wonderful gift to your team to get it right. The power score, I love this in terms of the focus on creating high performing teams, prioritize, ensure they're a team focused on understanding the priorities. Make sure you have the right jockeys and the right horse and the right role certainly there. So you've got the who right, and then the results focus back to the performance, tuned into the performance metrics, and then those wonderful leadership behaviors. I know it's assigned to CEO, but I think these are traits in all good leaders: be decisive, be adaptable, reliable, and engaging. So Geoff, you've been a wonderful guest today. Look, what's next for you?
Gosh, what's next for me? Let's see here. More international expansion. So we have some of our colleagues and clients in Europe, Asia Pacific up next. More digital innovation around tools for our consultants and our clients to make better people decisions. Making use of these big databases that we've been talking about, benchmarking. More artificial intelligence and machine learning to generate insights. To help leaders make good decisions. And then, I don't know, just continuing to spend a whole lot of time with my wonderful wife, Lauren, and our 9 children is what's up next for me. 2 are out of the house and 7 are in the house. So that's, family is a top priority. And here's like a final postscript on this whole thing. If you really commit to doing good hiring, the good news is you yourself can have a little bit more free time spend with the relationships that matter most. And so that's tops my list of what's next for me.
Well, you're certainly an exemplar of someone who is a student of their own material. People will be able to pick this up from the podcast, but you certainly don't look like a man who is under a huge amount of stress from 9 children, a wife, and a business that's scaling internationally. You're looking very fresh and fit and well, Geoff. So whatever
Thanks.
you're doing, keep doing it. It's wonderful.
Well, I hide it well. Anyone who runs a business knows that there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of people to look after. And but yeah, it's a great pleasure. I really enjoy entrepreneuring, and I really enjoyed your podcast today, and congrats on all the success of it, as well as kind of here's to continued success for folks who are trying to scale their business. And I really liked your the Scale X 10 disciplines just seem to resonate, and we appreciate, we view it as a privilege that you put some of our ghSMART stuff into a couple of the keys to success.
Thank you very much. And I wish you all the very best with everything you're doing. Look forward to staying connected. And if anyone wants to find out a little bit more about your work, Geoff, where would you signpost them to?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, Geoff Smart. We occasionally post to Twitter, Jeffrey at Geoffrey Smart. And then, if people want to source a fantastic consultant friend of theirs to come, work at ghSMART, hit our website at ghsmart.com, and if you click on careers, send anyone our way who might, enjoy joining our merry band of folks who are helping leaders amplify their positive impact on the world.
Brilliant. And we'll put a link to the 3 books in the show notes. Geoff, thank you so much again for your time today.
Pleasure.
You've been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. Take care.
It was brilliant. Apologies for running over, Geoff.
That's great. That was fun.
So much in that. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it's great fun. Time flies when you're having fun, and you could tell that you've lived your own, preaching in the businesses you've built, which is nice, and it's an authentic, kind of vibe from having been there and done that, rather than just preaching something, folks ought to do this or ought to do that.
Yeah, no, I love this, and it was again a conference with the same conference actually that Richard Branson was speaking at. The late Jack Welch was speaking, and that was a real penny dropping moment for me. He polled the audience, 2,000 people. Did I share this with you before?
No. What did he say?
And he said, how many people feel talent is the greatest enabler in their business and the most important asset? And of course, 2,000 hands went up in the Royal Albert Hall. Everybody, yeah, of course, we know the answer to that. That's most important. He says, okay, how many people have a talent function? Or he says, I'll give it to you if you have a HR function. How many people have a HR function in your business? And I think about half the hands stayed up. He said, okay, so you've got HR. Talent's the most important asset in your business. We've all agreed. Okay, how many people have a talent manager? Somebody to manage the talent? About 30 hands remained up.
Yeah.
Okay, so talent is the most important asset in your business. Around your boardroom table, we would all agree that we should be talking about the most important things to enable our business. How many people have a talent director in their boardroom? 2 hands out of 2,000.
Yes. Wow.
And that was just penny drop. That was mind blowing for me. I came home with a plan. I could. I was thinking, oh yeah, our understanding of HR was there's a compliance function there, and they fill in all the paperwork and they do all of it. But actually, I need somebody who understands our business, where our business is going, and who will champion bringing great people into the business and champion their progression through the business. And our engineering manager was fantastic at this within his own function. And I asked him, would he become our talent manager? He says, give me 24 hours. He came back and he agreed. And he was our talent manager for about 4 or 5 years until the company grew too big. And then we recruited in then a talent director and a lady who was appointed to the board. And it was just a penny.
I love that story. It just seems like if something matters, you need to focus on it. You need to have people whose whole job it is to do that, and then you need to have a clear sense for where you're succeeding or failing on that thing. But just doing. I remember a client once used the expression, a strategy without people or a plan is just wishful thinking.
That's so true. I talk about that. Vision without a plan is just a dream. A plan without vision is chaos. But Geoff, look, conscious of your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Great fun. Just send me any of the stuff. I'm happy to pop it out around our social network whenever it's ready. And if there's I don't know if you have any questions or anything, just holler. But thanks for reaching out, and it was great fun.
Look, we'll connect again because just this topic is just so important. So look forward to staying in touch, Geoff. Thank you so much.
All right,
Thank you.
Take care, Brendan.
Bye bye.